think we're live. All right. So, yeah. Obviously, nobody's watching yet, but we are live to talk about, how we're celebrating 1,000 subscribers.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
cool.
It's fantastic. Congratulations, my friend. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been quite the slog.
I bet. But that's
Seeing
pretty great.
you see lots of I always say people that like our kind of content, they actually prefer the video essay.
Oh, okay.
They don't like the conversational type. They like to be just sit there and be educated.
Mm-hmm.
So then also I've watched brand new video essay pages pop up within matter of months, get 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 subscribers. And I'm sitting here at 800 after 4 years.
Yeah.
So
Well, the video essay stuff is really hard. It's a lot of work to do
it
that.
is.
And it's
Yeah.
not as but there are channels that definitely do more of the live streaming kind of stuff that do well too. I think it's just a matter of trying to find more of an audience or whatever, and maybe hopefully someday one of the things that we make gets picked up by the algorithm and people check it out or whatever. But that's always tricky.
Yeah, that's right. I know a lot of reaction stuff gets popular too. So
yeah, I mean, that's something we could always do at some point, like if we ever wanted to. Where we could, I don't know how that would work within the context of doing the stream. Like if you have another thing where it shows the video while we're on it or whatever. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, I mean, we could literally do it on StreamYard, right? It has a presentation kind of thing where you can do that, and it's pretty cool. When me and Damien record, we often do that.
Oh, okay.
But we don't stream live, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know his videos tend to be rather long, but
yeah, we record for 3 hours every 2 weeks, so.
Yeah, as do we. So sorry, man. I know it's a bit of a slog, but yeah.
No, it's all good as long as it's comfortable. As long.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yes. Well, and then that kind of creates the content too, right? I mean, that's always the tricky thing is doing the show that we do, because I'm pretty happy with it. I like what we do, but at the same time, I can understand why people maybe would prefer something a little bit more, I don't know, curated or whatever.
Yeah.
But
I know, I randomly didn't delete an episode of ours when it came up in my podcast player. And as a podcast, our show is great.
That's right.
I don't know how it translates on YouTube so much, but I know as a podcast, it's lots of fun.
And that's, I think, the right thing. And mainly that's the part that we care about the most. So it's if you add up that everything that we get on YouTube plus whatever we get in the actual listens on the podcast form, and you add those all together, I imagine it's much bigger than what just the YouTube is.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because there are some creators who are very successful who just post their stuff to YouTube and it doesn't really get many views, but that they're successful at it.
Yeah.
But they're doing that. I mean, what's interesting was when I was doing my own shows, putting them to YouTube was sort of seen as weird, but now people do that. It's, I mean, I didn't realize, I guess I was kind of ahead of the curve on that, but I always thought, well, put them to YouTube too.
Yep.
Because YouTube's free. That was kind of the one thing I always thought about. I was well, if I don't want to maintain this other thing, I can always have the YouTube version or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
But I've taken most of that stuff down. I wouldn't want any of that stuff to see the light of day, to be frank.
A lot of it, eh? Velkin999 is joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, my thinking is as long as there's some dedicated people out there who enjoy what we do, that makes it worthwhile to me.
Yeah,
that's right. And if it ever gets bigger someday, that'll be great too. But I'm happy doing what we're doing, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like we got a good, I guess, rapport with the people that watch us and listen to us.
Mm-hmm.
So even on the Spotify, you can post a question for people to answer regarding the episode. And yeah, we often get responses on that, for hey, yeah, this is what I think of the episode that you're talking about.
Oh, great.
So yeah,
That's
so it's
great.
cool stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Bemke Watches Buffy is here as well. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that very much. We certainly appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the project, and I've said this before, but this is definitely the project that I've had the most fun doing over the years. And it's the one I've done the longest too.
Right.
You know, the other podcaster or media projects that I've done over the years may last a year or a year and a half or 2 years or whatever, but we've been doing this now for almost 3.5 years.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I think it's pretty incredible that we've continued to do it as long as we've done it. And if you watch this stuff from the beginning to the end, you see us both grow as people and sort of change in our perspectives. And I think that's kind of fun. You can kind of see that evolution in real time.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. My old podcast, Brainstorm, I did that for almost 6 years, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And then just about 6 years. And it was a lot of fun, but I don't know that it had the room for like my personal growth that this show has. Like I can learn on this show and then change my opinion and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right.
It's fine, right?
Yeah, that was kind of how I felt about the show that I used to do. I mean, I did 2 shows. I mean, the first one was an Army of Principles. That was the first one. And that one was, I mean, the original vision I had for the show that I originally did when I was still very much in this sort of the atheist and skeptical community or whatever, was to kind of do like an hour-long sort of news magazine show, but in a podcast form. You know, like I was at the time I was still very much watching a lot of like cable news, and so my sort of guidepost was always at the time was Rachel Maddow. I was like, okay, I like the idea of doing like sort of an essay to either open things or close things, which is kind of how she did that. And so my show would end up doing that. And that was something I carried more into Reason Revolution as well. Like I had what I call the special comment, which I realize now, like I was completely just aping, Keith Olbermann. Like that's what Keith Olbermann did. And then it became a thing. So yeah, I mean, I like doing that show, but it was also a ton of work. Like it was a lot of like to sort of schedule it out and then to sort of speak about it on the fly. I could have written it all out, but I just didn't have time.
Yeah.
And then over time, both of those shows, especially Reason Revolution, both of those shows became interview shows. Like I just started interviewing people. People reached out to me to want to talk to me, you know, and so I did that and it was fun and I enjoyed doing some of that, but I was also very happy to, 2018 was a very hard year for me. That's when I kind of quit activism. It's when I quit a lot of stuff and I was gone. I wasn't on social media for probably a year. I mean, I just kind of quit. I moved on and just focused on my personal life and I was very happy, I was doing better. And then, and then we did this show and then I had to also kind of take a break. I mean, just sometimes I need to stop, but I'm in a good place now where like, I have a healthy balance between my job and doing this and my wife and like it works fine. Like I'm very happy about it. And this is the stuff that I think is the most rewarding and in many ways I think my most and our most sort of positive contribution is doing this kind of show. And then of course with you doing like the interview show episodes that you do as well and the other things that you do, which are great. But yeah, I mean, we could always look into doing kind of reaction stuff. Like if we wanted to do that, especially if we wanted to do that, like in the post games. I mean, that's what Michael Brooks used to do. And so we could do some of that in the post game. And then like, you could chunk those out and then have those be specific videos that people can watch.
Yep.
That's how the Majority Report does it. That's how Left Reckoning does it. That's how Michael Brooks used to do it.
I think the Surf Times does something similar to that. Like they kind of, although his entire show is kind of reactions, I think, but then the way he breaks it up, it's for different audiences at different times and whatever.
Yeah. So those are different things we could do. I just never thought about it. It wasn't even really sure if that was something we could do. I didn't really know.
Well, we have the capability.
We have the technology. We can
That's
rebuild
right.
him. We can make him better.
That's right. Yeah. Bemke Watches Buffy says, getting better is all anyone can ask of anyone. Look at Bill Burr.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
like that clip that Hassan Piker had of Bill Burr basically intellectually beating the shit out of Bill Maher.
Which is not hard, but it's also rewarding.
Yeah. Oh, and some random geek is over on Twitch saying, I'm here, but I'm very, very tired. Well,
Hey, well, thank you so much for being here. You know, stay as long as you'd like.
get your rest. Don't feel obligated to
Yeah,
sit here
you
with
can always watch
us.
this later. You know, don't feel bad. You know, but yeah, I think it's interesting to watch people grow. I mean, that's certainly my trajectory. I know it's yours too. Of you just kind of, you know, you and I were people who were a part of that community and the sort of skeptical atheist community, and we sort of left it behind and realized that. I mean, is it even really a thing anymore? I mean, that's really the
I don't
question.
even know. Yeah.
I mean, I guess.
There's, I still follow, like, I follow Rebecca Watson, like,
She's
on,
great.
on YouTube, but I don't really listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe anymore, even though I
don't
think
either.
that's still going.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think Skepticon was a thing still a year or two ago.
Okay. And I know that, like, I don't know if they still do TAM or not, but the Amazing Meeting, but I think they do. Or maybe that's merged with Skepticon now that Randy's passed away. But like, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of feel like, you know, we're old enough to remember how it all kind of changed and became very different. And we were like, okay, it's time for me to go, you know?
Yeah,
and sometimes there's a part of me that's like, it's not you, it's me. Like at some point I realized I'm like, I just don't fit into this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And I think when it came down to it, at the end of the day, my biggest issue was I just had serious reservations about where I thought everything was going.
Well, I mean, that's we talk about Steven Pinker all the time, and like fucking Jordan Peterson, half of the fucking skeptical and atheist movement, they glommed onto his bullshit, and like, because they hated feminists, right? And they hated anybody that challenged the status quo. So
I just never understood why, but I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense, because if you look at it from sort of a materialist perspective, like atheism is, I guess, in some respects, a position of privilege where like you've had enough level of sort of affluence and wealth that you can sort of think about those things more abstractly.
Yeah.
Most people are religious. And I've just realized over the years that when it comes to religion, like my issue isn't necessarily religion per se. My issue is dogmatism and bigotry. Those are the things that matter to me most. So like if it comes to like dealing with like a, you know, sort of a left-wing Christian who wants to like create a more just world, that sounds great, compared to like a libertarian atheist or something like that. You know, that's like not cool.
I guess we got a couple things.
Okay.
Yeah. Some random geek said, yeah, I mean, there are still Sam Harris fans. Yep.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would imagine that is dwindling by the day, although I could be wrong. Yeah, there was a time where it was like I was still listening to Sam Harris, and then I was listening to the Michael Brooks show, and at some point I stopped really listening to Sam Harris, mainly just because I think he's an idiot. And I got really tired of his like housekeeping shit he'd have at the beginning of the show where he would just lather on and
say
on.
Stupid shit at the start of his show.
And I'm just like, shut the fuck up and get to the show. Like I would skip through that crap just to get to whoever he was talking to. Because I just couldn't take it.
Yeah. We got over on Twitch, we got Like Nerd Like Kids. That's David. He was the studio producer for Brainstorm Podcast.
Nice. You guys had a really sweet setup. It felt very cool. I remember when I went on it years ago, I was like, wow, this is like legit. This is a real thing. You know?
Yeah, it was that was so much fun. And actually, I still talk to all those people.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, like with the exception of Angela, who passed away in 2022. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good project. I'm glad Glad I did
Yeah.
that.
I'm glad you did too. I always really liked it, and I really enjoyed being on, and you guys are really, really nice to me, and it was really fun. Yeah, I mean, at the time I was still doing some of the Reason Revolution stuff, and I was working with a collaborator at the time, and part of the reason I kind of left was that sort of my collaborator and I didn't necessarily have like a falling out per se. It was basically we just realized we were kind of on two different paths.
Right,
And he
right.
was like kind of on one road and I was on the other, and I was kind of ready to be done.
That's
I
fair.
actually like genuinely like there's a big part of me like there was a period of time between like the spring or summer of 2018 through like the spring of 2019 that was a really good time in my life. Like it was great because I wasn't on social media, I wasn't doing anything, I was just working, I was just living my
Yeah.
life, and I really enjoyed that part. So there's inklings of me that's just like, oh, what if I do that again? But I like this too much. This is too much fun. I enjoy doing this so much that it's walking away doesn't excite me more than continuing to do it. So that's, I mean, and so
That's always good.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah,
really
that's
like doing it. It's such a joy because you've created a place for us to do this that is so fun and interesting, and you do a great job of setting things up and having an open mind and listening to me go on about whatever. It's I appreciate it very much.
No, yeah, for sure. It's it's one of those things like I'm not out here trying to I guess maybe it's part of why I'm an anarchist, right? Like I'm not out here trying to force my perspective onto people.
Yeah.
I put what I think out there, and I'll argue for it if the circumstances are right,
Mhm.
but I'm not, I'm just a guy trying to do his best.
Yeah, that's true. I feel the same way.
So,
I feel the same way, and that's what I think makes it a lot of fun. And it's been really really fun the last couple of years because of especially like kind of leaving PSL and like leaving activism behind me was a positive move for me. And
right.
so like doing this is really my calling. It's what I like to do. It's where I think I can make my most meaningful contribution. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
No.
enjoy it very much.
What do we got? We got Vulcan999 said, I couldn't possibly listen to atheist content anymore. I don't think I can learn anything I don't already know. That and the reactionary pivot some big names did.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I I held on to a few of my atheist podcasts, like The Scathing Atheist, what Serious Inquiries Only,
Uh-huh.
a few of them. But then when the one guy, but then they slowly dropped off as they became like their liberal centrist type of like perspective really contrasted my left anarchist communist perspective.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think that, the only person within the last few years that I've ever listened to occasionally is Seth Andrews. And
Oh
and
yeah,
even and he's okay. Like I really don't have like a huge beef with him. He's not terrible in the way that like other people in that space are. But I just feel like I don't you get to a place in your life where you kind of feel like you don't need that anymore.
yeah, that's right.
And you just want to spend your time focusing on other things that are more interesting. Because I think whether or not someone believes in God is truly one of the least interesting things. To
Yeah,
me, it's one of the least interesting questions because I don't really care. I'm not saying that I'm like post theism because I'm not. Like I would describe myself as an atheist, but more than that, I would describe myself as a humanist.
yeah,
I care about people, and I want to like put out into the world my ideas in a way that hopefully are constructive and hopeful
right.
and so that it's not because I'm not angry like about that anymore. I'm still
Yeah,
angry about a lot of things. But I'm not angry about that. It's just I think that the last 10 years have really educated me on like how being in that world and like kind of thinking of how important it was kind of silly. And like when you recognize how silly it is, like it's like there's this whole other world out there that's like kind of a problem,
right, right.
that we need to pay attention to. And yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
there's a few guys. Yeah, like let's see, some random geek mentioned PZ Myers
Yeah,
is still pretty cool.
he's
And
all right.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Bemke watches Buffy said Kyle Kalinske is an
yeah,
exception in the Atheist Creators.
yeah. He's
Yeah.
not bad. He's great. And like he and Crystal Ball are like a thing now. They're like a power couple. You know.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean, from what I remember, I don't watch Kyle that much anymore, but like I remember, I think they got married. Like I'm pretty
Okay.
sure they're a thing, which is kind of cool. You know.
For sure.
Um, you know.
Yeah, we got let's see. Where did I stop looking at comments? Bemke watches Buffy said atheism is a level of privilege, but acknowledging that it is inherently classist or a privilege too. So it's like it's just inescapable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. That's right. That's right.
yeah. I. It's funny because when I started seeing Pam, like she kind of thought like atheism was a white people thing. And I was like, well, maybe it is. Like, yeah, because it is a kind of a privilege thing. A lot of people who are like in poverty, they don't have the opportunity, like they don't even have the opportunity to question such things.
That's right.
And like I know a lot of like we talk a lot about Burundi because that's where she's from, and like everybody's Catholic there. That's just how it is. It's like they don't necessarily have a forced religion on everybody, but everybody's Catholic, and
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, you know, living in Indiana as somebody who's lived in Indiana my entire life. Like I grew up secular, and so my parents were not really particularly religious, and so they weren't atheists, but they were basically of the mindset that if like you want to go to church, that's fine, but if you don't, like that's okay too. So I grew up largely non-religious rather than explicitly atheist. So like religion just wasn't a really big part of my life. I could count on probably both hands the amount of times I've been in a church for some kind of religious service outside of like weddings and stuff, like, you know, because I've been to churches for weddings, but even then, if you actually added all of those in and you add all of the times I've been to religion, you might get 10, 15 instances. I mean, it's just religion was just never a thing that was really factored into my life all that much.
My dad was like he was an alcoholic when I was growing up. So when him and my stepmom got together, they quit drinking, but then they found religion. So during my teen years, we went to church. Like we went to first. It was like Robert Schuller and the Crystal Cathedral. We watched them every Sunday. On TV, and then it was like we went to the local Methodist church in our community, and like I was just telling Pam a story about when I was about 16, 17 years old. I was interested in the occult and stuff. And so I ordered a book at the library called Witchcraft and Satanism. And the library called my host to tell me that it was there. And my stepmom lost it. Like she flipped out that I was interested in this witchcraft and Satanism. And I had to sit at the kitchen table and talk to our pastor for like 4 hours on a Saturday because I was going to the dark side.
Right. How old were you at the time?
Yeah, 16 or 17.
16 or 17.
Yeah.
That was kind of what it was for me too. Like and I think I've talked about this with you, and maybe we did it when we talked to Damien a couple of years ago or whatever, but like, you know, weirdly enough, a big component of like my finding that I'm really truly like kind of a secular person was when I was in high school, like reading the Da Vinci Code and like seeing the movie. And the idea of Jesus Christ being kind of a real guy who had a bloodline was very appealing to me because it like made him very human in a way that he isn't really human.
Right.
And so then I got into the books that were related to that. So those are sort of like cult adjacent, right? So you would look at books like Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince's book, The Templar Revelation, or Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And you realize some of it's kind of bullshit. Like it's not, it's kind of pseudo history. A lot of it's kind of nonsensical. But it was very intriguing to me. And that was part of what kind of started me being interested in learning about religion. And I've always looked at religion in a very academic way. It's never been and what I mean by that is it's something I kind of think of as an outsider. I will always be an outsider, that I kind of look at it as if I'm studying history or political ideas or whatever. I kind of see it as an outsider looking in, trying to get my best sort of grasp of what this might be like for other people. But I don't feel that myself.
Yeah, I think I viewed it. I always viewed it the same way, even though it was literally in my house being, kind of pushed on me.
Yeah.
But I for sure never thought of it as like my thing. I was never a believer, right?
Yeah.
So
I just remember when I was in like 8th grade, so I had to be like 14. And I remember it was like after school, and I had a friend of mine at the time, and I think the librarian, and they like literally did like some kind of like born again shit with me. Like I vaguely have this memory of like them sitting with me and sort of like, I don't know, making me born again or whatever. And I just remember asking them sort of basic questions, certain ones. Like I was like, look, like I very clear, like even at the time at 14, I was very opinionated, and as I think most 14-year-olds are, and especially when it came to politics, because that was kind of when I became politically conscious. And I can say like, I'm against the war in Iraq. I hate George Bush. Is that gonna impinge upon me being a Christian? They're like, no. And then I'm like, I'm anti-war. Is that an okay? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And it was really only the one thing that I did ask them, and they're like, that does not work, which is that even at the time I was pro-choice. And so I'm like, look, I'm pro-choice. Like I believe in women having reproductive choice. And they weren't quite so sure about that.
Yeah. Can I still be a Christian now?
Can I still be a Christian now? It was that, and also like swearing, like, like I like to say fucking shit. Like, is that okay? But again, it was this very academic experience for me where like I'm sitting there, I feel nothing. It's nothing to me. It's just this thing that I'm walking through with someone.
Yeah.
And I really did it because I was friends with this person, and I was trying to be friendly and nice. I was the new kid in town. I was trying to be polite. And I look back on it now, and it was like kind of super weird, but like it's, and I remember I just remember how boring it was. Like, we talked yesterday about in one of the pregame and the postgame about how boring like a lot of sports are, or at least how I feel about them, like football or whatever. I was like, religion's kind of boring too, when it's just the act of like actively like participating in religion versus like studying its history or the theology behind it, the ideas behind it, because that's the stuff that interests me.
Yeah, I love the theory. I love the philosophy
really interested
of it.
learning about it. Yeah, but I don't really want to participate in it. It's not really my thing.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is also that I'm just not much of a joiner. I've realized over the years that like I've joined many different groups. I've been a part of different causes. I've had this like inkling to like connect with other people, and then I've realized on some level that like I don't really want that. What I actually want is like meaningful connections with a few people that make a difference in my life, like you or my wife or my work friends or my other friends. Like that's the stuff that matters to me the most. So in that regard, maybe I'm like a bad socialist because I'm not like, I don't have like a lot of praxis, but like it's so what I tell myself is like, this is a form of praxis, although it's probably the easiest form of praxis imaginable. But so that's why I have like a ton of respect for people who do.
You could just be posting on Twitter. So, I mean, this is slightly more work than that.
That's right. And I think we both put a lot of thought into what we do, which is, I think, different from other people. But also, I mean, I think that's definitely why I do it. But yeah, it's always been this kind of, there's always been a certain level of disconnect and distance between me and like sort of being the true believer.
Yeah.
I have a hard time doing any of that. It's difficult.
I remember when I was like, I don't know, again, 17 or 18 years old, my dad and my parents were in Amway. And Amway does church when you go to the conferences. And so we went to the church, and apparently it must have been like one of these ones where you do communion. So they all had to go up and do the wafer or whatever. And I was like, my parents were like, so Corey, are you going to come up? And I was like, I'm not going up there. Why would I go up there? I don't know what the hell this is.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience as a kid. I was probably, God, 9, 10 years old, maybe. And my mom and my sister were baptized, and they went and got
Oh, okay.
baptized. And my dad and I are sitting in the audience. Now, my secularism really comes from my dad. Like, my mom is not particularly a religious person, and to this day, she's not really a religious person, but she's not secular in some ways that my dad was. So, like,
Mm.
growing up, I just remember that day where my mom and my sister were baptized and watching them being dunked in these like clear tanks that were up on the pulpit or whatever. And just looking at my dad, and we're both kind of looking at each other, and there was this kind of understanding between the two of us. We're like, this is weird, right?
This
This
feels
is
weird.
this is odd, isn't it? And to this day, I still feel that way, and to this day, like, my sister's not particularly religious either, and neither is my mom. Because religion's a social thing, right? So, like,
Yeah.
the reason my sister went was because all of her friends went to church there, and it's like, it's a social thing. You want to be able to sort of have a certain level of social grace, or sort of social brownie points for doing something like that with
Yeah.
people who you consider your friends. And
Right.
I didn't care about any of that. So it was an interesting experience, very similar to what you had. Yeah.
Let's see quickly. Oh, where was it? Somebody said some. Oh yeah, Velkin 999 said some people use church for community, which I can get behind.
Totally.
And
Absolutely.
absolutely, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I just think, like, I never want to take anybody's sense of community or sense of well-being away from them, right? So if you find that that's valuable to you, then absolutely, I'm never gonna be the guy that's like, yeah, you suck for wanting to feel good.
100%. I feel the same way, and it's about my commitment to human freedom, right? The people have a right to organize and congregate with people of like mind who they want to
Yeah.
share social experiences with. I think that's totally fine. I think the big issue for me is, and it always goes back to, it's fine. I think it's fine if you want to have all these things. Keep it out of government. Keep it out of the public schools. That's all I ask.
Right. Yeah. Well, because that goes hand in hand with the I don't impose my views on you, right? Like, because nobody gets to impose their views on each other.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that one of the things that is very distressing about the current state of the United States is that we're seeing, I think, a rise of it. There are two trends happening at the same time, and they're very interesting to me. One is the rise of the nuns, the NONES, people who are atheists, agnostics, humanists, the unchurched, the broadly non-religious, people who don't go to church or don't identify as religious in any way. It's one of the largest demographics in the United States. I think it's second now only to evangelicals.
mm-hmm.
So you're seeing this like decline in religion over time in the United States. I saw a recent article by Hemant Mehta, the Friendly Atheist, who is somebody I actually still follow because he does a lot of really good journalism about like church state issues and stuff. And he talked about in Scotland now, the majority of Scotland Scottish citizens are non-religious explicitly.
Okay. Wow.
Which is kind of incredible, right? And I think that over time, I think you're going to see this more and more and more. And the decline in religion in America, a lot of the reason why I think the religion has declined in America is a couple of things. One, I think it's politics. I think that I think a lot of people associate Christianity in America with kind of bigotry and hatred, and authoritarianism, right? So like they don't want to be a part of that. But I think another reason why people are no longer going to church or people are becoming more and more non-religious is by default because people really no longer belong to civic and political organizations in America the way they used to. I think, I don't know if we did it as a podcast episode. We might have, I don't remember, but Robert Putnam's excellent research on a lot of this stuff. He's the guy who wrote Bowling Alone. But he wrote a book recently called The Upswing, which is kind of like his sort of broader themes about America. And that's one of the things you see is that, people belong to less and less, belong to fewer organizations these days than they used to. And I think church is a part of that. I think you can see it just like the people who no longer, are on bowling leagues, or people who don't go to the VFW, or people who don't belong to the Lions Club or whatever. Like it's I think that in America, that this sort of hyper atomization
Yep.
that we live with is I think also a factor of the decline in religion. But as you're seeing the decline in religion of America, at the same time, you're seeing this rise of right-wing Christian nationalism. And I think part of it's because they know they're in the minority. Like most Christians aren't even like them. Most Americans are not even like them. And yet somehow they keep having positions of power. Part of that's just because they're very well organized. And they have a lot of money.
Yep.
But and I think that's like the only thing about a Trump second term that's like terrifying to me is that the right-wing Christian nationalists get into power and they do really horrible things.
They get to have their Project 2025 or whatever the fuck it is.
Because I mean, I think that's part of it is that they don't want, I mean, I never really thought that once we sort of had marriage equality, I didn't really think we would see the kind of LGBTQ backlash that we have now. I sort of thought that was the start, and it would kind of broaden out and broaden out. But I was wrong. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that in America, that sort of Christian nationalism has a lot of pull. The people who believe in it are very fervent about it.
Yeah. Zalrock VODs. My hot take that isn't very hot is that missionaries are basically imperialistic by converting non-Christian tribes to Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity and colonization go hand in hand, right?
Yes.
And imperialism go hand in hand.
Yeah, because Christianity was the legitimizing ideology, right? So it's Engels in his one of his introductions to, I think, his Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. He has this really interesting sort of passage about how Christianity really was kind of the religion of the poor and the downtrodden for a long time, and then as Christianity and sort of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution kind of killed religion in a lot of ways for a lot of people. That they no longer had that as sort of a binding ideology that people they could use. They sort of realized, oh, we can sort of change Christianity to not be about like the religion of the poor, but to be the religion of like the middle classes, to be the religion of the affluent. And that's what they did. And so you see Christian Christian justifications for slavery. You see Christian justifications for imperialism. In the 19th century, you have something that comes up, which is called a rugged Christianity or a muscular Christianity, which is sort of paired with empire.
Right. It's those are the guys that are they're painting Jesus carrying an AR-15, riding on the back of a horse, jacked to shit, and like
exactly. Or in the 19th century, it manifested itself in the form of like these incredible like lithographs of Jesus as like this extremely powerful figure, right? Mm-hmm. Which he is, I guess, in the theology of Christianity, but it's never really the way they sell it. So the whole, camel going through the eye of needle stuff doesn't really apply anymore, does it?
Right. But it was funny. I just saw something on Twitter the other day, like a picture of like a giant, super muscular Jesus beating the shit out of a Satan with a cross, and I was like, "Oh, that's quite the hilarious image." Like, it was just very funny.
It will also like that. I mean, where's the whole turn the other cheek thing? I mean, mind you, Jesus also beat the hell out of the money changers. So I guess if Satan is like the money changers, but that's the part that's interesting is that but that's part of religion, right? You can kind of warp it to justify whatever you want, right? And so you can have versions of Christianity like, somebody like a Dorothy Day or somebody like who was sort of social justice oriented, and she sort of was advocating a form of Catholicism that put that, front and center. Or you have somebody like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who would sort of take Christianity and Catholic theology and evolutionary theory, because he was a scientist, but he was also a priest, and you kind of put those two together, and that was kind of his theory. And So like there are different ways you could do it. I mean, you have probably the American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who was very influential on Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama,
Right.
who who was writing about sort of the tragedies of American history and the children of light, the children of darkness. That we are constantly fighting the light and the dark, the balance of all of that. So there's all those kinds of things. So there's many different ways, like, and that's why they always say, there's as many types of Christianity as there are Christians. Every single person kind of has their own view of it, right?
Yeah.
And you could also kind of say the same thing about socialism, that every person kind of has their own version of what socialism is in their head.
Yeah, that's right.
And part of like the goal of what we do is to sort of show people the broad swath of different perspectives that fit broadly on the left that are, so yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think that if you have a social justice mission, if your goal is to improve people's lives now in the immediate, then yeah, I think you're going to be somebody I can work with.
Yeah, and I think that's come across in a couple of the episodes that we've done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about like the humanism or like the separation or the faith in humanism or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The secular faith.
Yeah. The faith in finitude. Yeah. The Martin Hagelin stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing that I find fascinating, because a lot of the sort of, and I think I listened to a very good recent episode of Tech Won't Save Us, where Paris Marx interviewed, I can't remember her name now, but she had written an article about how the sort of the transhumanists are kind of the new religious movement. And I think that's true. And I think that a lot of this sort of trying to transcend the body and kind of live forever and like in a computer or whatever, I'm like, this isn't that fundamentally different from, I die and I go to heaven and I get to live forever. It's not really that different. I think what makes humanity special and what makes us worthwhile is the fact that we are finite creatures, that there is an end, right?
Yeah,
I think that there's, and we were talking last night in the episode on degrowth about limits. There are real limits, right? And limits are okay. Like there's a creativity and in limitations.
Yeah.
I think that recognizing that we are all finite creatures living in a finite time on a finite planet, right? I think that matters, because to me it underscores our responsibility to one another in a way that it doesn't. If like, oh, I'm just going to put myself in like a computer or whatever. It's like, first off, you're not asking a scientific question at that point. It's a metaphysical one. You're assuming that the mind is not an emergent property of the brain, that the mind is a separate thing,
right,
which can then be put into something else and be the same thing. Like that's not how brains work.
No, that's right. So as a like a natural materialist, I don't think that you can do that, right? Like
I don't think you can either. Or at the very least, what ends up being whatever the version of me that's in the computer or whatever is not me.
Right. Yeah.
That's not me. It's some version of me.
Yeah.
But it's not me. And, because my brain and my mind and my personality are an emergent property of my living tissue. Like it's all interrelated, and you can't just like take a chunk out of it and put it somewhere else. It's not how the human mind works. I find it interesting because there's a lot of this sort of utopianism. I would call it bad utopianism, where it's instead of wanting to improve the world, they want to escape the world.
Right. It's the same thing as like people who want to go to Mars instead of fucking dealing with climate change, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I made a video a while back about how I've talked a lot about how much I love Christopher Lasch, and in his book, The Minimal Self, that we covered for the show, he talks about how in the 1970s and into the early 1980s, there were certain forms of apocalypticism that happened. Mm-hmm. On sort of the religious front of it, it was the sort of the desire for the rapture, the desire for the apocalypse, that Jesus would come back, that the day of judgment would come and harbor the 1,000 years of peace or whatever. But for the secular version of that was space exploration, that like wanting to get out of the planet, wanting to leave, wanting to go somewhere else.
Right.
instead of addressing what's going on right here. I mean, I think to me, that's the problem with the age that we live in, is that I'm not against space exploration. I'm a big champion of it. But the problem is I just don't like capitalists doing it. I don't like these sort of, because they're not particularly good at it either.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like they don't take into account the massive fucking emissions that they're putting out when they do this shit. Like they're fucking space tourism or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't consider the consequences at all.
No, and I think the other part of it too is that, like, what do you seek to achieve? Because the thing is, like, we can do a lot with robots.
Right.
You know, and so, like, if your goal is knowledge and learning about the world and learning about different planets, like, robots work really well. Like, they just do. You know, robots don't get hungry, they don't get tired.
Yeah,
they will wear out at some point, but they can keep plugging along. You know, it's like, also they don't have the problem of radiation in the way that we do. Like Mars, because it doesn't have like much of an atmosphere, there's this radiation hitting you all of the time. So you'd have to solve the radiation problem. And the thing is, it's like people are like, oh, well, we're going to terraform Mars. And it's like, well, why don't you take all of that energy that you have towards wanting to change Mars to being a habitable planet to keeping this one habitable? Like, because to me, like, the test of trying to get to Mars is doing some of this here and trying to figure out how to reproduce it in Earth, on Earth, to help improve the climate. And then, okay, what we learn from doing it here, we can then apply to Mars. Like, to me, that seems the more logical way to do that. But
but
that's not sexy.
You can't abandon a dying planet to go to a not alive planet and then pretend you're going to turn it into a living planet.
I know. It's the definition. To me, it's the definition of insanity. I mean, like, I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been Robert Park. It was either Robert Park, who I think he might be still alive. I'm not sure, but he was great. He was on Bullshit a number of times, and you know, he was a physicist, and he wrote a couple books about, one was called Voodoo Science, which is very good. But then he also wrote another book called Superstition. And I think in the Superstition book, he talks about how the problem of getting to Mars is not worth it. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's better just for us to build robots. Yeah. Because they're cheaper, they're more efficient, they give us the knowledge that we need, and so forth. And so ultimately, when people are talking about space exploration, they're not talking about mere knowledge, right? They're talking about the sort of the human spirit, right. We go out to the far unknown, the final frontier, and we do that kind of stuff. I'm not necessarily opposed to any of that. And there's certain things that humans can do better than robots. I'm not saying that they couldn't. But at the end of the day, I mean, we are in a situation where we are in a climate crisis, and we have serious issues at home here on Earth. And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of that can harbor life. Yeah. And so why are we talking about like this far-flung idea of like Mars being a place we could live on? Like, no, that might be something that we could do like 200 years from now, or 500 years from now, or 1,000 years from now, if we're still here. Like, that's something you could do. But I don't think it's something that's going to happen within my lifetime. If it does, I'll be thrilled about it. But but at the end of the day, it's not something I see as possible. Yeah, no, it's not like going to the moon. You know, going to the moon was a very easy target. It makes a lot more sense to build stuff on the moon as like a test run to build stuff on Mars. To me, it just seems like a much smarter way to do it. Yeah, for sure. Bemke Watches Buffy had some good points here about Elon Musk has one good quality as a billionaire. He acknowledges our energy consumption via production isn't sustainable. That's it. He's a huge dipshit. That's true. And as I think we discussed last night on the Jason Hickel episode, where we were talking about his book, like electric vehicles have a lot of problems of their own when it comes to resource extraction and the horrible conditions that, you know, either literal children labor or slave labor in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, who have to mine all of the, you know, the coltan and the cobalt and the lithium and the you know, the precious metals, the titanium, all of it, the gold that goes into making these electric cars. And And so, yeah, it is unsustainable. But the thing is that Musk's solutions to that problem are just as unsustainable as him acknowledging the problem. Which I know you probably know that, but I just think it's important to make that point known that like EV cars are not going to get us out of this mess.
Yeah. Yeah. He or they said, I'm not aware of someone with a platform that big that acknowledges our energy consumption crisis. Obviously ignores capitalism being the main hurdle.
Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that like he's part of a larger movement of him and like Peter Thiel and others, the long-termism, which I know Paris Marx has talked about on his show, that they're sort of like we're thinking 1,000 years or 10,000 years, 100,000 years in the future or whatever. And it's like, I think that's all well and good, but like there's stuff that's going on right now. That's the thing I think that, again, that goes back to my version of humanism, where it's like our lives are finite. Like there might be a day where we're on Mars and we live in a computer, but like for now, there are people who are starving, and there are people who are homeless, and there are kids who have to go to a book fair and they don't get to pick a book out of their own because they don't have any money to.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Like just, I know that seems more specific than the other ones, but it's just in my mind of like thinking of like a great example of this. I have a great example of this. I saw a Cybertruck for the first time today.
Oh boy.
So I don't know if you've ever seen one in the wild. I had never seen one in the wild until today. I was on my way home. I was on I-465 here in Indianapolis, and I was driving up near 96th Street on the northwest side near Carmel, and there's a fucking Cybertruck, and he just passes by, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a Cybertruck. And me, I'm like stupid. I'm like, and I'm in, still traffic. So I'm like trying to grab my phone to get a picture. Too fast. But it looks terrible, by the way. It just looks awful when it's just stuck in traffic. It looks ridiculous. But there is a part of me that like loves the idea that at least something like that kind of exists, in the sense that people are still thinking that way. I don't know. It sucks. Like, because I hate Elon Musk, and I think Tesla sucks, and I think the Cybertruck sucks because it's not very practical. This is the American in me. Like, where's the practicality in any of this? Can you haul stuff with it? Like, does the back open up easily? Like, I mean,
I don't know. Yeah.
Are you schlepping like, because like I have a Jeep Compass. I have an SUV. I can pull up the back hatch. I can lay down a tarp. I can get mulch. I can get stone. I can move furniture. I can do all kinds of stuff with it. Right.
There you go.
And it's not a very big car, and it gets pretty good gas mileage. And my wife has a Chevy Captiva, and again, she can do all of that stuff. But I don't have to spend $100,000 on a Cybertruck to get it. The reason I say all of that is it was this incredible contrast between seeing this Cybertruck coming down the highway, and then as I was pulling off of my exit, seeing a man in a wheelchair on the side of the road with a little like kind of desiccated plastic cup, kind of panhandling.
Right. Yeah.
And seeing those two contrasts within a few minutes of each other really underscores that in some respects our society is bankrupt, like morally, spiritually, literally bankrupt.
Yeah, for sure. So we got a few comments. Vulcan999 said, fix the fossil fuel industry? No, go to Mars. Completely rendering an uninhabitable planet livable sounds easier.
Exactly. It's the same thing with the aerosols in the atmosphere to block the sun, right? They will literally put stuff in the air to block the sun before stopping private jet rides, before hoarding wealth, before stopping hoarding wealth. Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Big time.
We got Cybertrucks are ugly wastes of money.
Yeah. And the thing is, man, they don't look great in person, because the thing is, they're not. I was under the impression that they're more shiny than they actually are. I thought they were more shiny. They're not. They're pretty matte. Like it's like brushed metal, kind of like a MacBook or an Apple product, where they're not particularly shiny, and and it's huge. But when you see it in rush hour traffic crawling on the highway, it really takes the cool factor out of it, because there's a part of you that's like, there's a version of this that would be cool. Like you can see, like you can kind of imagine there's a version of it that's cool, but it's just not, because it's kind of ugly. It's ugly, and it looks stupid. Like it looks really
Right.
stupid when you see it on the highway, and
Yeah.
you're like, what the fuck is this? Like it's just absurd, and it is a monstrosity, and it's like I can imagine if you have it like on like in like a presentation where you have it like on a stage and you've got lights on it, it's all clean and everything. Like I'd imagine maybe
Right.
you can make it look cool.
Yeah.
But just to see it come down the road on the highway, you're just like,
That
wow.
doesn't look like much. Yeah.
Yeah, you spent $100,000 for a meme. Like, how's that make you feel?
Yeah. Pretty special, I guess.
Yeah, I bet.
It must.
Yikes.
Yeah. We got BMQ watches Buffy says, Jeeps are the chiropractors of cars, bro. Get rid of it ASAP.
Oh man, I mean, I'm still paying it off. I mean, I've had my car now for 3 years. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, who knows? I'm a big person, so I'm like 6'4". So like being in a car isn't always fun because it's hard to get in, it's hard to get out.
Right.
I buy SUVs mainly just because they're easier for me to get in and out of than cars.
Yeah. Yeah. My car is pretty low to the ground. Like I can sure tell on the days where my knees aren't the best that I'm like having trouble. I'm like, oh, I better lean on the door to get out of the car today. So.
And it's like for me, a lot of cars I have to kind of fall into them to get into them because of my size, and then I have to like kind of cling on to like to get out because they're just so small.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the tricky parts. I mean, that's again one of the benefits of public transit is that you'd have like these nice open cars where it didn't really matter how big you were. You could just sit or stand or whatever, and you'd be fine. I've never felt uncomfortable with my size on a public bus or on a train. I've never felt like cramped. The only place I've ever felt cramped other than a car is an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And when you fly coach,
because they pack you in there.
Because they pack you in, right? The only appeal to me of first class is just to have the extra space so that my knees and my hips don't hurt when I get off the plane.
That's fair. Oh, yeah. I think we're pretty much all caught up. I guess,
cool.
Zalrock VODs has said Adam something has some really great videos on the scams Elon has done.
Oh, okay, cool. And I mean, Paris Marx did an excellent like 4-part series on Tech Won't Save Us on Elon. That is really, really good. I highly recommend it. Something for more like normie media that's pretty good is John Oliver did a segment on Elon Musk that's pretty good.
Okay.
And then I'm trying to think who else has done. I mean, I am intrigued. Like once I can get it for like $1 or $3, I will probably get the Walter Isaacson book on Elon Musk and read it at some point. Mainly just because I like him as an author and I read his book on Steve Jobs, which is pretty good. I think Isaacson, of course, is somebody who's like he's kind of like a court historian. He's not going to like talk out of school too much, but he would often kind of just. When you read his book on Steve Jobs, you get a sense of like Steve Jobs was an asshole. Like might have been a visionary, but he was also an asshole and smelled bad all the time. Like didn't bathe, like was really into like alternative health and stuff. And so he just stank all the time, which is crazy to think about. But with Musk, it's kind of the same thing. Apparently he goes into something called like, what do they call it? Oh my God, what is it called? Like, something like sicko mode or something like that, but he goes into like some thing where he like becomes like an unhinged asshole like to people or whatever and just loses it. But
okay.
Anyway, I think
so Summer and McGeek said, are there any other content creators you regularly watch on YouTube or podcasts you regularly listen to?
Oh yeah, sure. You can go first if you want.
The first one off the top of my head is FD Signifier. I watch his stuff like regularly. It's actually weird that I'm not a patron of his yet, because that's one of those creators that I actually wait every 2 weeks and I watch for the new video essay or whatever that he comes out with, and then I watch his alternative channel, which is Signified B-Sides, and I watch that all the time.
Nice.
Which is how I know about the Kendrick Lamar Drake rap beef. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any idea.
I know it mostly through my wife because she follows Twitter. And
Okay.
she's good at keeping me abreast on all these sort of pop culture things that are going on because I'm like an old man, you
I
know.
have literally no opinion except it seems like FD Signifier likes Kendrick Lamar and not Drake, so I guess that's the team I'm on.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that's the team I'm on too. I'm more team Kendrick, basically just because like Drake really sucks. I think.
Yeah.
But and apparently he's been weird with young women, so there's that too.
Well, I've heard that for quite a few years. Like people have been saying that, but then I've never seen any like evidence or anything.
Yeah,
So I
it's
don't
very
know.
odd. I don't know how accurate that is, but something that I know is out there. So allegedly, please don't sue us.
Yeah,
Um,
he is
uh,
he
yeah,
is Canadian. He was on Degrassi
yeah.
and whatnot. So
His real name is Aubrey.
okay, I didn't know
His real
that.
name, his first real name is Aubrey. But yeah,
Yeah, I watch Anarch and I watch Zoe Baker and I listen to like Citations Needed podcast
that's a big one for
and
me. Yep.
the Blowback podcast. I got halfway through the series on North Korea and then I stopped. I kind of just lost it. Yeah, but
yeah. Citations Needed is excellent. I highly recommend people check that out. Um, I do like Adam Conover a lot. I think he's awesome.
I haven't seen
Um,
his stuff in a while though.
yeah,
I don't know if they stopped putting it out or if it
I
stopped
think
showing up in my feed.
he's mostly making the podcast. He does his podcast and he does some video essays. He's kind of gone more independent. And it's allowed him to be more radical than I think he's been in
Right.
his previous iterations. But I like him quite a bit. I like Rebecca Watson a lot.
Yeah.
I like Citations Needed. I like Tech Won't Save Us, which I think is in many ways required listening to try to understand our times.
Yeah.
Like we live in the age of tech. Like it's to understand where we're at. I think people need to listen to that.
Yeah, for sure.
The newer show I've been listening to is Ed Zitron's Better Offline, which is kind of like Tech Won't Save Us. He's been a guest on Tech Won't Save Us, and I like him a lot because he's kind of no bullshit. He put out a really great newsletter recently where he just says like Sam Altman is full of shit. It's like the title about
Nice.
OpenAI and their whole botched launch of a Scarlett Johansson-esque like voice simulator thing where my hunch is they say, oh, well, we hired an actress for that. Well, it's like, well, if you hired an actress for that, then why 2 days before you launch it, you beg and plead Scarlett Johansson to come on board? Right. Chances are you stole her voice from other stuff. You made the voice simulator and then you tried to cover your ass by asking her to say yes, which of course she didn't say yes. Like, I think OpenAI is just like total P.T. Barnum stuff. Like I've hit the place where I think it's total nonsense. I think AI is a lot of hype and it has more of a bark than a bite, at least right now. And I think we have to seriously consider, we were talking earlier about energy consumption, like the consumption that is required for this kind of technology is absurd.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I would say other things that I mean, in terms of, I do love John Oliver. I know like his politics are certainly limited. There are criticisms for sure, but I always really like him. I think he's great. I think of one of the few mainstream people who does pretty decent stuff is him. I like him a lot. And he's getting closer and closer to saying things like, well, this is just capitalism. Every once in a while, I'll put little things in there where it's like, he kind of gets it, Adam Conover, Tech Won't Save Us, Left Reckoning, I listen to every once in a while, which is the show that the guys formerly the Michael Brooks show, after Michael passed, they started Left Reckoning. Okay. It's pretty good. Every once in a while, I'll watch a good Dave Rubin dunking video from Majority Report, but I do listen. I spend a lot of my time listening to audiobooks. So I'm doing a lot of audiobooks because that helps me not just enjoy like books in general, but also helps me like sometimes to help me get through the stuff we're doing for the show. Sometimes I have to do it in audiobook because I don't have time otherwise. Fair. So yeah, those are the kind of things I definitely check out.
Yeah, we got a lot of good suggestions in the chat. Zolrock watches, what is it? Mini Minutemen, because he's an archaeologist and debunks all the pseudoscience on TikTok.
Ooh, that sounds great.
Bemke watches Buffy, recommended Left Reckoning.
Left Reckoning is great.
Some Random Geek asked, is that the Citations Needed podcast with Adam Johnson and not the Citations Needed comedy podcast by the God This guys and the Scathing Atheist guys? And it's Adam Johnson and Nima Shirazi. Citations needed, not citation needed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So,
and they're great. I think that if there's anything that might be required listening, it might be that show. It's one of the few.
Bemke watches Buffy, also recommended Second Thought, who I also watch.
Second Thought's huge.
Yeah. And Hakeem, who I actually stopped watching because I don't know. There's something about Hakeem that I just don't enjoy anymore.
Yeah, I think for me, like the Second Thought, I think Second Thought is excellent, but for me, as somebody who is I'm kind of a seasoned veteran in this space at this point. Like a lot of the videos he makes are things I kind of already know. It's not like I'm not learning that much new from it, but I think it's good that that's out there for people to kind of dip their toes into this space and learn more. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, Hakeem and the guy from Second Thought have a podcast, the D Program, which I listened to for quite a while, but I don't really listen to anymore.
Yeah, same.
Can't seem to fit it in my rotation anymore.
Yeah. Another channel that I think is worth checking out too is Renegade Cut, which is good too.
Renegade Cut, I really enjoy.
Yeah, Renegade Cut's great.
Yeah, for sure. MQ watches Buffy, said Ben Burgess, I mean, I've been a big fan of Ben's for a few years.
Ben's is great.
But I'm not so big a fan lately.
Ben's great. I've been on his show. I've done give them an argument. I've done his show. We did an episode about Scientology.
Right.
And I like Ben a lot. I think Ben's a nice guy and somebody who I definitely have a lot of shared affinity for.
Sure.
My big thing with Ben is that just for me personally, and this is not like a criticism of him necessarily, but for me personally, I kind of like him better in written form than in podcast form.
Oh, there you go.
That's just, I think his writing is really, really good. And I think like his podcast is good, but I just like him in written form better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Velkin 999 suggested Moneyless Society.
Oh, that one I've not heard of.
I tried to get, I used to subscribe to them, and then I haven't seen their stuff in a long time or whatever, so I kind of forgot about them. So I might have to throw that into my podcast app again, or check out their channel. I'm not sure if they've got a YouTube channel or which is their preferred way of doing it.
Oh, another podcast that I love that people should check out too is If Books Could Kill. Which is another excellent podcast where if you guys love us dunking on Steven Pinker, they spend 3 hours dunking on Steven Pinker.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is fantastic. That podcast to me is wonderful because it's sort of continuing the tradition of people who are like, see this thing that we think of as being kind of conventional wisdom. It's actually total nonsense. And here's why. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. There's some discussion going on around Zalrock hates Hassan Piker and Bemke watches Buffy likes him. And I like Hassan Piker.
I think he's quite.
Yeah. I never got into his stuff because I don't do Twitch as you know. And so I'm just starting to pick up his stuff through shorts and YouTube clips and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I'm enjoying it though.
The thing that I think about Hassan, what works for him too, is that so he's very handsome. So that's to his benefit, right?
Yeah.
So if people are interested in getting into left politics, they don't necessarily want to look at me. They can look at him and go, wow, look at this handsome guy talking about socialism. That works. I think that's cool. I think we need more beautiful people doing that kind of work.
For sure. Yep, for sure.
No slight to us. I'm just saying that he's a pretty handsome guy, and it's I think
there's no doubt. Yeah,
but yeah.
And he had a good start. He's obviously a very smart person, mm-hmm. and he was in journalism for a long time, and he's he was on the Young Turks or
Yep.
whatever, and he's good on stage. He's got good stage presence. I think he's a very good like person to have on the left,
Yeah.
speaking as a person on the left.
And he's somebody who can articulate to people in a way that doesn't come off as particularly like maybe not patronizing or bookish, or I think that works for him too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel like when people watch Hassan, they don't feel like they're like he's talking down to them. And I like that. I think that's a nice appeal to him too. But again, I'm not the biggest fan. Like these are just sort of my limited
that's right.
experiences with him. But yeah, I mean, the person I loved is gone, and that's Michael Brooks. I mean, he was the guy I watched and listened to for years, and it's sad. I mean, he's been gone now almost 4 years, and it just sucks because I still feel like there's a hole
right
of where he should be, and that no one's really quite filled.
Yeah. Zelrock VOD said, Hassan has done apologia for the Russian invasion, and as a Ukrainian myself, I don't much care for people who do that.
That's fine. That's fair.
I can understand that.
That's totally fair.
Yeah. Velka999 said, I didn't pay my attention to Hassan until the whole socialist with a mansion thing. Then I paid less attention.
That's fair. That's totally fair too. Again, I've not watched a lot of his stuff. I know for a while he was doing a show with Ethan Klein of H3H3, but I don't think they do that anymore. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that these guys aren't gods, right? They're people who are worth, criticizing and saying, I don't necessarily agree with that, or I don't necessarily agree with this. Like,
yep, that's right.
Yeah.
It's like we don't expect like that because somebody listens to us regularly or watches our stuff regularly that they have to agree with everything we say.
100%. Right? My goal with our show is to articulate as best I can what the ideas in the books that I talk about are.
Yeah.
And letting people make up their mind about how they feel about it. You know, I kind of share my personal thoughts in some of it, and then I share, I just try to be as honest and fair to whatever I'm reading, and trying to read it and trying to sort of steelman it as best as I can. But yeah, I think everything has kind of criticisms to it as and that's part of life. Like, I think if we weren't disagreeing on anything, that would be terrible, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, like some random geek says, just forget left Twitch. So
this is where like I'm such an old man. Like this is like I'm an older, like I'm sort of a middle millennial. Like I'm just not in tune with a lot of what a lot of kids do. I don't really even know what Discord is. I know it's a thing that people use. I don't really know what it is.
That's where my local book club meets. On Discord.
It's on Discord. I don't really know what Discord is. I remember, but so like, yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time. I wouldn't say that I'm like a complete and total like ignoramus, but there's just certain things that are just, I've hit a place in my life where I'm probably too old for that, or that's not going to be for me. Like it's, I only have so many hours in a day.
Zalrock asked, what are your opinions on Stalin? As someone who hates him, I'm not going to judge you guys.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know. So, that sounds like you're going to judge us.
So we've talked about Stalin on the podcast when we talked about Michael Parenti's book, Black Shirts and Reds, and about the ways in which Western historiography often, I think, misrepresents things in relation to Stalin. But yeah, I mean, I think my view of Stalin is very similar to probably Trotskyists, in that I think that that the Russian Revolution was, I think, a great event in the history of humanity. I think that the early Soviet government, while deeply flawed and had, I think, a lot of problems with it, many of which kind of sowed the seeds of what would come later with Stalinism, was a noble adventure. I have a more positive view of Lenin than probably a lot of people on the sort of anarchist side. I see him as sort of a deeply intriguing, interesting, but flawed political leader who did a lot of things right, did a lot of things wrong. I think the Stalinist period is a period of counter-revolution and reaction.
Yeah, I think that's pretty to the solid line, is like, that's for sure. Even if you give the USSR credit before Stalin,
Yep.
then you have to acknowledge that Stalin kind of went backwards, right?
Yeah. And that's not to negate some of the real achievements of like the Stalinist era, whether it's like defeating the Nazis or although we can make the argument that like also you have like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 where they sort of become buddies because and the way that sort of pro-Stalinist historians will often spin that is, well, Stalin tried to do kind of an alliance with the United States. The United States said no. But the United States didn't say no necessarily because they were like anti-Stalin, although there was certainly anti-communist part of it there, but also in the 1930s, there was also a lot of isolationism in the United States as a result of World War I.
Yeah.
And so people were not as willing to enter into sort of these international unilateral agreements. Yeah.
I think like, obviously, Zalrock says also the Holodomor and other acts of genocide that Stalin did. Like,
that's 100% right.
I don't
massacre.
I think we can, as thinkers, we can like be like, okay, well, Trotsky murdered a bunch of anarchists just because they wanted to have a more broader socialist revolution.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
whether it's Kronstadt or Ukraine. Yeah,
that's right. We can talk about these things and be honest about them without dismissing the entire Soviet project.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's inconsistent. I don't feel like it is.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, for me, like my main thing is, so I have a whole bookcase devoted to, Marx, Lenin, Stalin, the Soviet Union. I have books from sort of right historians, people like Anne Applebaum and Robert Conquest. And I have books from sort of leftish historians like, what's his name? Ronald Sunni, or Trotsky or whatever. But like, I mean, I think that it's an incredibly complex topic. I don't think it's controversial to say that like Stalin was an incredibly repressive leader. And that, but it's also, I think, fair to say that a lot of the tools that he used in many respects were kind of implemented in the years before he came to power. So a lot of the ways that like Trotskyists will often sort of tell the story is that like Lenin and Trotsky could kind of do no wrong. And if it wasn't for Stalin, everything kind of would have been wonderful. Like, I know that's like painting with a broad brush, but that's kind of what they think.
And clearly that's wrong.
And clearly that's wrong too. So like, for example, the repressive secret police, that all started under Lenin. That was called the Cheka.
The Cheka, yeah.
And so, and they were the ones who, murdered the Romanovs. They were the ones who killed opposition. They imprisoned and often killed opposition leaders. After Kropotkin's death in 1919, like anarchists couldn't organize publicly in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, and people will make excuses for that, right? But
exactly.
So to me, the Soviet Union is an incredibly mixed bag with a mixed history that is worth studying because as socialists, I think we have to learn from its failures.
There's a lot to learn there for sure.
There's a lot to learn there. So I'm not a tanky.
Zalrock said, the way people put these people on pedestals annoys me. Respecting someone is fine. Just don't throw their crimes under the rug. Without
a doubt. Right.
I gotta agree. Yeah.
Like for me, like another figure of history that has always been fascinating to me ever since I was a kid is Abraham Lincoln, right? So Lincoln is a deeply complex figure who, did signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but like the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all the slaves and only freed the slaves that were in the southern states that had seceded. The border states like Tennessee, Missouri, who still had slaves, people in the border states that had stayed with the Union kept their slaves until after the war and after the 13th Amendment. Until after the 13th Amendment. So, and not to mention the fact that the single largest execution of Native Americans by the government in U.S. history happened under Lincoln's watch. So, like, there's all kinds of stuff that like there's a lot of good that might be there, but there's a lot of bad, and that's the thing that's I think very important. These people aren't gods; they're people.
That's right. All presidents are bastards. That's right.
Yeah, you could totally make that argument. If we're following the rules of the Geneva Convention, every president since 1945 is a war criminal. I mean, if you want to follow the actual rules to the letter.
It's funny. I was just talking today with Damien about we were talking about Israel and Palestine, which I'm sure he'll have the video in a day or two or something. But one of the things is the ICC issued a warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and the defense secretary for Israel.
Yeah.
And the United States is reacting like the ICC is in the wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
And Lindsey Graham like accidentally said the truth when he said like, oh, well, if they're going to go after Netanyahu, then they have to come after all of us. And we're like, fuck yeah, you're war criminals. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
This is also part of the reason why Donald Trump will never see the inside of a jail cell.
Yeah.
Because if you can prosecute a president for crimes and they can actually be committed, they can be convicted of those crimes, that can happen to any president. And they don't necessarily want that to happen.
No, because they're all war criminals. Like
they're all war criminals.
Yeah. Like you know? Like Damien had documentation going back like 1984, 2002, like all these past presidents, every single one of them had to fight against the ICC because they were all committing war crimes.
Yes. I mean, that's all of the foreign interventions of the United States in the last 100 years, 125 years. That's a chart that's in Gore Vidal's first pamphlet, that Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace. This is great chart. And a lot of people bought the book, not just to read his essays, but they bought it for the chart. This is like not pre-internet, but it's like very early internet. It's very hard to get that stuff, right? So to have it in one place is kind of nice, where you can see like the casualty numbers, right? So like, for example, I think if we want to talk about villains of history, probably one of the biggest villains of history is Woodrow Wilson. Who, as president, did a lot of really good things, like the fact that during his time in office, you have the institution of the Federal Reserve System, which takes the chaos out of the money system in the United States. And the Federal Reserve is not perfect, but it's much better than what came before, where states and banks themselves made their own money, and it was very unclear whether that was, it wasn't backed completely fully by the United States. He also created the income tax. There's child labor laws. There's he's carrying out a lot of the progressive era stuff in terms of domestic policy. These are all good things. But Wilson was also a virulent racist who tried to purge Black people out of the civil service. And the first film, the first motion picture ever shown in the White House was Birth of a Nation, which is this film that is this sort of love letter to the Ku Klux Klan. And Woodrow Wilson played that in the White House. Wilson was a virulent racist. He tried to invade Mexico. Reading about Woodrow Wilson is one of those where you're like, yeah, Stalin's bad. Don't get me wrong, but if you want to, but it's like, if Americans are like, oh, Stalin was so horrible, I'm like, well, guys, I mean, was the Spanish-American War not a thing to you? Did we not kill 100,000 Filipinos during the Spanish-American War?
Yeah.
Under William McKinley? That's what I'm saying, is it's like that there's in the West, there's like this Russia phobia where it's constantly like, look how evil these people are. And it's like, they did a lot of terrible things, no doubt. But also like the United States has done a lot of terrible things, and we've had leaders who have done a lot of horrible stuff.
Even like you think of like Britain and the British Empire and the colonization of like Turtle Island, and the number of people and the damage they did to the indigenous people here. And like, and then of course they did that in India too. And like, no.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And I think that's what's really important, is recognizing that centralized political power comes with centralized violence. And I think that's a very important question to start asking about, which is, what is the legitimate use of force? When is violence justified? Is it justified at all? Those are all those, I think, really important questions. And learning from these lessons of history helps us to, I think, a certain extent, inform those questions better.
Yeah. I guess I didn't mention, I've listened to Margaret Killjoy's podcast, Cool People Who Read Cool Stuff. I listened to Robert Evans' podcast, Behind the Bastards, and he recently did one, I guess, a little while ago. It was like a 4-parter on, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was like the head of the Cheka for a while. And just just a terrible, terrible human being.
Yeah. Right.
Just like awful.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you won't find a USSR apologist when you talk to me.
No, I'm fascinated by the history of it.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
so like, as you guys can see, like behind me, like I collect like Soviet era posters. Like I'm very like I love like
Yeah.
Soviet era propaganda stuff. It's stuff I'm very interested in. Um,
I'm also very like I really like the aesthetic of like the
yes,
Soviet Union had very cool posters, a very cool aesthetic. It was very, I don't know.
yes, that's the one thing I think that, yeah, it's all of that sort of, what do they call that? Deconstructionist art or the modern art, you know, artistic realism. I think the art, a lot of the art that came out of the Soviet Union was beautiful,
Yeah.
and incredible. I mean, when I was in college was when I saw a Soviet poster in person for the first time. I was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City with my dad. And it's one of those where it's like a bunch of hands that come together into one giant hand. And it's like, together we will achieve socialism or something like that.
Nice.
And it's this like beautiful poster. I mean, it's really striking. The ones that I have behind me, the Lenin one, that's the kind of the big one. This one's from like 1980.
Okay.
And then this one down here is, I think, from like the 1970s. And then in these little frames, these are like Soviet era postcards from like the 1960s.
Ah, very cool.
Like I collect this stuff. Mostly I buy it on eBay. Because I'm fascinated by it. But I also have like Americana stuff in my office too. Like I have like Lincoln stuff. I have a picture of Lyndon Johnson in my office. Like I guarantee you I might be the only person in America that has an office that has both a picture of Lyndon Johnson and Lenin. But
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but I'm fascinated by history, and I love historical figures, and I like how they're depicted in art.
That's
You
cool.
know, but yeah, no, Soviet Union stuff's fascinating to me. You know, it's and I think that its triumphs and its real limitations are worthwhile to study, because we live in the world. We live in the post-Soviet era, right? Like we've lived in the last 35 years. We've lived in the sort of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I think it's had a lot of serious consequences for the world. Obviously, the invasion of Ukraine is a good example of that.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Like, and I think that the U.S. as a power needs that offset, right?
Mm-hmm.
Needs something that can offset it, which was what the USR kind of worked as on the global scale.
Yeah.
Where they like I say, like U.S. capitalism has become global capitalism ever since the collapse.
Mm-hmm. In a lot of respect, I agree with you, and I think it's I you know, to me, the end of the Soviet Union wasn't like a triumph. It was kind of more of a tragedy in a lot of ways, in the sense that it did bring a lot of harm to people. You know, in the form of life expectancy went down, rates of poverty went up.
Yeah.
Because the thing was that when the neoliberal order kind of came into Russia and created the sort of kleptocratic, plutocratic state that now exists there, there's no checks upon it like there may have been under the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Ideally, what I would have loved to have seen happen was Gorbachev's reforms be successful and the Soviet Union liberalize, and that and politically and economically, and continue and kind
survive.
of maybe go kind of the path that China did, but it just couldn't.
Yeah.
So it didn't course correct in the way that China did. And part of that's also like, you know, the Soviet leadership were just, they were kind of old and sclerotic, and it was kind of an old, kind of desiccated husk of something that had once been. You know, this wasn't the Khrushchev era of like everybody was like kind of succeeding or whatever. It was definitely, it was not great. And you can make an argument that America very much feels like the 80s Soviet Union, where it's just kind of falling apart. Nothing really works, and we're governed by really old people that are out of touch, who have no clue. I think it's, and yeah, I agree with you. I think the United States needs to have some kind of counterbalance, which is why I'm glad China's there. I mean, it's much better. Yeah, the Communist Party in China is no picnic, but I would prefer it over, you know, a pro-capitalist, pro-US, pro-Western government in China that would suck.
Yeah, that's right.
That'd be
Yeah.
much worse. So, you know,
Yeah, it's like so Zalrock and Summer Nim Geek like both said like yeah, Zalrock said I don't like the USSR much. They also oppressed Ukrainians and other ethnic groups.
sure,
Right. And that's yeah,
that's
I
totally valid.
like you're never going to get me being like, yeah, that state was good actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's right.
And some random geek said I have issues with China too, and absolutely, like
Without a doubt, yes.
States are bad in my
Right.
opinion. Like this is just
States
how this is.
states are severely limited, right? We're sort of talking about it in the sense of like power politics, right? It's like the
Right.
balance of power, right? That when the Soviet Union existed, it forced the United States to have to be better as a result, because the world was sort of watching, right? Like the Soviets did a lot of propaganda around the racism and of Jim Crow that existed here.
Yeah, that's right.
So, so Valrock, you're absolutely right about the oppression of ethnic and religious minorities. That absolutely happened.
Yeah.
And it is pretty hypocritical for a country like the Soviet Union to have called America on that kind of oppression when it was also doing it themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's just the limitations of states, as Corey said, right?
Yeah.
And I think that really goes back to Chomsky's core question, which is, is this state legitimate?
Right.
And is it fulfilling the needs of its people? Is it doing what it said it's going to do? And ask those basic questions. Does it justify itself ultimately?
Right.
Can a state justify itself? And I think for a lot of people the answer is no.
Yeah, I think that's where I am.
and I think that in principle, yeah, I think you can certainly make that argument.
Well, the states that currently exist certainly can't.
Yes, they're not great, right? And the limitations of nationalism. I mean, look at Israel right now. I mean, Israel, the problems of Israel are directly related to a creation of a nation state, specifically one tied to an ethnic religious identity.
Right.
It's the same problem that exists in Iran. It's the same problem that exists with theocrats here in the United States. It's tying nationalism and the state to a specific culture or to a specific religion, right? And like in the Soviet Union, Marxism itself became this very ossified, dogmatic thing that was no longer sort of the living, breathing, sort of philosophical point of view that us in the sort of the Marxist humanist tradition would say yes. And there were people at the time who were Marxist who were deeply critical of the Soviet Union. People like C.L.R. James and Raya Dunayevskaya and Paul Matic and Eric Fromm. So like there's a lot of good people good thinkers within the Marxist tradition who are openly criticizing the Soviet Union, while at the same time they're also criticizing capitalism, criticizing the excesses and the deep challenges of a place like the United States. And so that's, I think, the real goal is to be really skeptical of power and to be skeptical of states and follow what they do and not what they say. Because, you can talk a good game, but what do you actually do is more important.
Because that's the thing. Like power will always lie if it maintains the power, right?
Yes, that's right.
So
it will lie. It will obfuscate the truth. It will speak in generalities. It will do a lot of high moralism while at the same time it's doing atrocious things to people. I think that's Biden right now saying things like, "Oh, well, if they go into Rafah, like I'm not going to give them things," and then within a few days, they approve another $1 billion to go to Israel, right? So it's like you can say all these things all you want, but what do you actually do? And I think that's the limitations of the nation state. The nation state is a very limited form. It has deep structural problems, regardless of whatever economic system's in them, primarily because the Soviet Union was mostly state capitalist. It wasn't, you could say it was socialism, you call it state socialism, or state capitalism, but that's what it was, right? And in the United States, we also have a form of state capitalism, but what it does is instead of using the state to maybe protect and create sort of a more of a social democratic state or to protect protect the rights of others, it's more about using the government to prop up and support and condone great massive corporations to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we haven't had there's a few comments from Some Random Geek and Zelrock regarding states are bad. Zelrock said, I don't think the CCP is communist anymore, not with billionaires in the party.
I think that's fair. I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah.
And I think like that whole socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? It's a very tenuous connection, right? So,
that's right.
But at the same time, there's a sense in which China is a better organized political society than the United States is. That the United States is a lot more messy, but we also have a lot more freedom, at least on paper. That doesn't always work in practice.
Zelrock asked a question actually earlier that I didn't get to at the time. Does it ever frustrate you, Corey and Justin, that people who don't know all about socialism talk about it?
Yes. And they don't, absolutely. Not to mention that, but also that they don't really want to have the kind of nuanced conversation about how kind of messy and complicated the history and practice of socialism is.
Yeah.
That it's varying different perspectives across centuries, trying to figure out what might be the best way to get there. It does make me very mad when people say things like, oh, well, the Nazis were socialists. No, they weren't. They just put that in the...
That makes me so mad.
They just put that in their name because like it was a way of being able to get frustrated working class people. You know, it's like Trump. It's like this MAGA communism shit. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it does frustrate me a lot.
Yeah, I get a lot of that. Socialism can't work. Well, what do you even mean when you say that? Like, do you know what socialism is? Oh, well, the USSR failed. Well, that's not the only socialist project that existed.
Yeah, and some would argue that it wasn't even socialist to begin with.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe, And then, of course, you got the people who call Justin Trudeau a communist, or like the Democrats socialists or
it's
communists.
So funny to me. Yeah.
Like, come the fuck on. Like, now.
It's so absurd. It's so absurd. The other thing I think that's very frustrating too is those who aren't willing. They are so mired in capitalist realism. They cannot think of a world beyond capitalism. They can't even entertain that notion.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that people often blame socialism for, it's like, well, that's just capitalism.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look at the bread lines. Look at these empty shelves. It's like Cuba. I'm like, no, it's like the United States. Like there have been food lines in the United States. There have been empty shelves in the United States. There have been price hikes and inflation. And it's like, that drives me nuts when people are like, something very American happens in America. This is not who we are. And it's like, yeah, it is. Like, just accept that this is part of being a part of America.
Yeah.
It's that people don't even want to entertain the conversation, that they don't want to have that conversation about how we can even, not even just socialism, but how we can even make capitalism less awful.
Yeah.
They don't even really want to talk about that either.
Those are the people that are commenting on our YouTube shorts, by the way.
Yeah. Or TikTok videos where they say something dumb. And you're just like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. So Zellrocker said socialism failed, so capitalism is better.
Yeah, it's this whole thing, right, where it's the capitalism becomes the default. This is Mark Fisher's idea of capitalist realism. We're going to do that book later in the year, and
I've already read that book, so I actually might be prepared.
Yeah, good. It's a great book. It's one that really influenced me too. I think Mark Fisher was great, and this idea of Tina, there is no alternative, right? The collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist states in the 80s and the early 90s really, I think, gave liberal democracy and capitalism kind of a victory lap. But the problem is a lot of the, I think, adverse effects of capitalism kind of left unchecked by a state existing like the Soviet Union. And the peak of neoliberalism and the deregulation of the financial industry and the collapse in 2008. I mean, it's just really crazy to me that in our lifetime, we've gone through two massive, major economic catastrophes as a result of both a housing crisis and then COVID. And yet we don't have universal healthcare in the United States, and people aren't seriously challenging the basic assumptions. And that I think is really, really frustrating sometimes.
For sure. Some random geek said, every time socialism has tried, it's completely failed. Yeah, that's because the USA coup countries that even try it.
Exactly. Because here's the thing, right? In Chile, when Dr. Salvador Allende came to power, he came to power democratically elected. He was elected.
Yeah.
So like in the United States, if you come to power through a revolution, say like the Bolsheviks did, that's a problem. We're going to invade you. If you come to power democratically and you try to implement socialism, that's a problem. We're going to coup you. It doesn't matter. And I think that's very important that you look at whether it's Bolivia, even 5 years ago with the coup, the attempted coup in Bolivia, or the attempted coups in Chile in 1973, in Guatemala in the 1950s, and in Iran in the 1950s under Mossadegh, which led to the development of the sort of more radical Islamist strain that now governs that country. Like it's directly related to U.S. foreign policy. I think you're right that socialism hasn't truly been tried because the United States hasn't let it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think like even like Cuba, which is still a relatively socialistic kind of state, like
it's state capitalist or state socialist, however you want to kind of think about it.
They've still had to deal with a constant like embargo against them for the last however fucking many 75 years now.
Right, exactly. And you can make the argument that Cuba is the one country that's kind of stayed true to a lot of the principles of Marxism, Leninism in ways that say like Vietnam, Laos, and China have not. Because both Laos, Vietnam, and China specifically have normalized trade relations with the United States.
Right.
They're sort of state capitalist societies now. So it's I think it's very difficult to implement socialism in one country. This is also a very major limitation of Stalinism, is the idea that, if you can build it in one country, then you can kind of export it elsewhere. It's like, no, there has to be a sort of global change of power. There has to be a global revolution, an international political revolution that institutes socialism. That's how it would succeed. That's where I think Trotsky was right.
Yeah. Where are we here? We had another question. Just gotta find it. Some random geek said, favorite author or favorite authors?
Good question. Go first, man. I talk about them all the time. I love to hear some of your favorites.
I don't know, like fiction authors. Like I love Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. That's
cool.
Like I've read that series like probably 25 times.
Oh wow, nice.
Like while other people were learning, I was reading the same fantasy series over and over and over and over again. But like even now, I mean, fiction, I still like Margaret Killjoy. But if I'm talking about like theory, I guess Malatesta, I like a little bit of, some Bakun and stuff. I read some Bookchin not long ago. I didn't mind that. I don't know. I don't really remember authors' names.
Some people often read the books more for their ideas rather than thinking of individual names. So for me, in the Marxist tradition, we think of a lot of great writers. Obviously, you go back to the old man himself, Marx, right? I think Marx is a very good writer and a very interesting writer. If you want to get a sense of how good he was at writing for a popular audience, I recommend checking out some of his newspaper articles when he wrote for the New York Tribune. And was writing sort of about politics. And some of them were also written by Engels too. But within the Marxist tradition, for me, it's like Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, and then within sort of the Marxist humanist tradition, Eric Fromm is probably my favorite author. within sort of the Marxist humanist space. I love him. And then my all-time favorite author is Gore Vidal. We've talked about Gore Vidal on the show. He is my favorite author. He's my go-to person. If I want to just read something, I will probably read something from his collection of essays, or because he was an incredible essayist, or one of his books of his Narratives of Empire series. He wrote a 7-book series on the history of the United States as a series of novels. He also wrote a book that was very ahead of its time called Myra Breckenridge, which was a sort of a vaudevillian sort of burlesque sort of farce about a trans woman, which is kind of interesting and very fascinating. So Vidal was somebody who I continually find inspiration from. In terms of other authors I really like, I mean, I actually just got a new book from him, or not, it's new to me, but H.W. Brands is one of my favorite historians. He's a professor at UT Austin, and I like his books quite a bit. I really like Rick Perlstein as a historian. His 4-volume series on the rise of the American right in America. I just finished reading Reaganland. It's absolutely fantastic. If you want to read a history book that reads like an excellent sort of journalistic account, or reads like a novel and just keeps you engaged, Rick Perlstein's the best. And then I realized I've not named any women yet, so I'll make sure to name at least one woman. Women writers who have always kind of stuck with me. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who I like quite a bit. She's written about American political history. I also really like Ursula K. Le Guin.
Actually, The Dispossessed is probably one of my favorite books of all time.
Great. The Word for World is Forest is one of my favorites too, of her books. That's great. I think she was wonderful. And then in terms of fiction, Gore Vidal, Kurt Vonnegut, Philip K. Dick.
Philip K. Dick is good. Yeah.
Philip K. Dick is one of my favorites. I just think he's amazing. Isaac Asimov is another one of my favorites.
I was just thinking, yeah.
I'm a big science fiction guy. So science fiction, Neil Stephenson, William Gibson,
Kim Stanley Robinson.
Kim Stanley Robinson, right? The first show we did was Kim Stanley Robinson. I love him. I think he's fantastic. If you want to read a good fiction author who is a socialist, who's using socialism and thinking about socialist ideas in big science fiction books, like, he's the guy to go to. He's great. Those are the list goes on and on. There's so many, but those are the ones that I definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've been on for almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
We can call her. I appreciate everybody who chatted.
Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't seen Bemke watches Buffy in the chat for a little while, so thanks for your comments.
Thank you for watching. Thank you to everyone who paid attention and was interested and had great questions and comments and had us thinking on our feet. And we didn't really have much of a plan for tonight, so this turned out really, really well, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And Corey, again, congratulations, man. I mean, this is great. And here's to another 1,000 and hopefully more than that in the future. And it's just been an absolute pleasure doing this with you over the years.
For sure. I early on in the chat, there was somebody who said something about 1,000 subs and only 3 people in the chat and what and whatnot. So you must be buying viewers or whatever. And I just scrolled on by it because this took me 4 years. So yeah. I don't think any of my subscribers are bots. I think they're all real people.
Yeah.
And they don't always watch every episode or whatever at the same time. So,
and the fact that people came on here tonight, we had a few folks because we didn't really do that much promotion for this. So people came on, we're here. Like, that's fantastic. I know people will catch it in the replay or in the podcast version. I don't care if there are some people who come in here and they gain something from what we have to say. I think that's worthwhile. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Even if the numbers are small, the impact is big, right?
Fewer but better, as Lennon once said. Fewer but better. Yep. Yeah.
Again, I guess thanks everybody. Make sure to go to Justin's website, justinclark.org. go check out. Oh, you got somebody doing emojis on Twitch.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks everybody. Make sure to check out Justin's website. Check out skepticalleftist.com.
Absolutely. Consider becoming a patron.
Thanks for helping us reach 1,000. Yes.
Thank you all so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll see you guys in a couple weeks for the new episode of Rub Reviews.
That's right.